Welcome back to Book Blitz, everybody. And today it's Hammer and Tongs, and we're back with Roran finally. So Roran is still hiding out in the spine. He's still kind of keeping a lookout over the village. He sees that the soldiers that came into town have kind of set up a camp, and now they're kind of patrolling the village and all this stuff. And it's very clear they're just gonna wait. They're just very content to wait for Roran to come back. And Roran also finds out that the Razak have questioned Katrina. This is all told to him through visits by Baldur and Albrecht whenever they come out to the mountain to talk to him. The Razak have interrogated Katrina, but they didn't find out anything. They didn't really gain anything. And so pretty much everything just continues as normal until that night when Roran sees a whole flurry of activity throughout the village. There's a bunch of torches just kind of blinking in and out behind the buildings, and it's obviously this mob with a bunch of torches that eventually go and they meet up with this line of torches where the soldiers have been staying. And for quite some time there's just this ongoing tension, this standoff that's going on between these two groups of torches, and eventually they all kind of break off and go back to where they came from. Well, the next day, Roran is told that a drunken soldier was in a fight and threw a pitcher at the old man Quimby, and Quimby was killed instantly. The soldiers quickly just took the body off to the Razak, and the villagers were trying to get the body back, and when they eventually did, all they got back were the bones that had been like literally picked clean. Like they just, all the flesh and muscle and everything had been eaten right off the bones, which is a horrific fate. Not just because, I mean, holy shit, the dude got eaten, but also because in Carvajal's culture, the only way that you can be taken off to the afterlife is if you are given a proper burial. And which cannot happen anymore since his corpse has been desecrated, which means that according to their, I guess, religion, Quimby's soul is kind of forever lost in the ether. And so this is a horrific blow. It just leaves the whole village angry and staggered. And while Roran is still frustratedly hiding out in the spine, he sees that a fire has been spread in the village, and it sets a number of buildings on fire, including the town's supply of seed, and it all goes up in flames. And fortunately, the fire does eventually get stopped before it does too much more damage. But this is obviously by far now that this is enough. I mean, someone's been killed. A portion of the village has been burned down. It's just, this is absolutely horrible. And so Roran is summoned down to the village to secretly meet with a number of the men of the village in order to take action against the Imperial soldiers. So he goes down and he meets up with Horst and a few of the other men of the village, Gedrick, Loring, and others. And it ends up, they have a sizable group of, I guess, like a dozen or more men, and they all agree they are going to do whatever they can to drive the soldiers away. Just get them out of here, because they have to do something. They have to take some sort of stand to defend themselves against what's going on, even if it means retaliation by the Empire, even if it means things get worse. And so they begin making preparations, and that's the chapter. So the next time they're going to begin their attack and attempt to push the Imperials away and the Razak away from the village. And once again, I mean, this is a very believable, very relatable conflict. I mean, outside of the fact that, you know, holy shit, a dude got eaten. Outside of that little detail, for the most part, this is an entirely relatable, even realistic scenario where it feels very grounded. I mean, it's a case of this abuse that is coming from this powerful imperial group, and the soldiers are not being managed, they're not being punished for their misdeeds to the villagers, and there's all this collateral damage as a result, and the villagers eventually have to make a decision that they are going to rise up and take a stand against this. And it feels, I think, because once again, these are just everyday folk. These are just normal people who, none of them are particularly skilled in combat. None of them are particularly, it's not like these are a militia. This is just a bunch of villagers that have had enough, and they're taking a stand against what's being done to them. And so really, I would say not only just Roran himself, but the entire village of Carvajal, with one exception, I really buy their motivation, and I really buy their conflict. I really buy the dilemma and the actions they're taking. And so as a result, I tend to really root for them, and I tend to identify with them and root with them and care about what happens to them far more than I ever do with Aragon, ever. Because the conflict is so much more grounded and real. And that doesn't mean that there's no way, to care about something that's more fantastic or whatever. But unfortunately, it's so obvious that nothing bad is ever going to actually happen to Aragon long term. I mean, it's not like he's going to die. He's just not. He's the main character of a teen fiction. And he's not going to have anything truly horrible happen that truly changes the course of events. Because even his back injury is going to just get magicked away toward the end of the book. So there's nothing in this entire series that affects Aragon himself or Saphira herself in any real, lasting, meaningful, consequential way. Unlike Roran and the villagers of Carvajal. Roran, in just a couple of chapters, is going to have the love of his life kidnapped away. Villagers are going to die. There's going to be people who are lost. There's a sense of loss. They're going to lose their homes. They're going to have to sacrifice and fight and survive their way across the majority of the coastline of the Empire over the course of this book. And that entire conflict, even when you throw the fantastical elements in, is so grounded because there's actual risk of failure, actual risk of loss. I mean, am I making sense? Like, it's just, the conflict makes so much more sense, and I care so much more about it.
Dude, absolutely.
Yeah,
no, Roran is not this, like, god figure, you know what I mean? Who is never going to die because the god of the book is self-inserting himself into it, and he's the best ever. Like, Roran is just a guy, and he's in a village, and shit can go wrong, and it does go wrong, and, like, I don't know, it makes sense to me. Like you said, it feels even realistic. Like, the guards are there's a tension between the townspeople and the guards. The guards, small incidents lead to big incidents. You know what I mean? They're getting rough in the bar, and that actually ends up killing someone. You know what I mean? And then, like, that causes a standoff. That's real. My only critique was that I feel like if you were a villager and you felt that the afterlife needed your body to be in check, as like a well-respected member of the community that everyone knew had only died by some soldiers' hands, but then was eaten, like his body was ripped to shreds, and the bones picked clean. That would be galvanizing in and of itself. And I think the town would have galvanized then. It galvanizes later, but I feel like it would have galvanized then. And that would be my main critique. But other than that, Roran's stuff is just so much more interesting because it feels real. It feels like there's an actual conflict. Like you said, bad stuff can and will happen. Like,
Yeah.
There's consequences to actions. Things happen and they get better or they get worse. Things change. You're not just gonna be like the favorite son of the universe for all 4 books, and like anything bad that happens to you is quickly undone. Anyway, so
Well, and unlike Aragon, we actually have a real conflict in the violence for Roran. I mean, he struggles with. I mean, and this doesn't happen in this chapter, but we are going to see throughout the book. He actually wrestles with the fact that he has killed people now. That he, and even if it was through necessity, all these things, he has like a sort of mild PTSD about it. He has this case of guilt in a way, and just shock at what he's done. And he kind of learns to cope with it and deal with it over time. Unlike Aragon, because Aragon, whenever we have one of these moral dilemmas, almost without exception, it gets dealt with by Aragon in a moment, in a conversation that happened that one time and that issue was dealt with. We don't see Aragon wrestle as much with a lot of these issues. Even when later in this book, a massive, this horrific thing comes to light that Aragon's past actions had a real consequence. And when this comes up, Aragon is shaken up about it for like 1 chapter. And then later on, we see him, try to make this thing right. And then it just kind of falls off the wayside for the rest of this book. Like, we don't have that with Roran. With Roran, every time he's in a situation of violence, even in chapters when there's not violence that actually is happening at the moment, he struggles with this stuff that he's had to do. He struggles with the fact that, he's got a body count that he's keeping track of up until the point where it becomes impossible. Not in some sadistic way, but in a sense of a tally of guilt, a tally of kind of crimes he's committed in a way that he's guilty about and wrestling with. We never have that with Aragon. I mean, with Aragon, we have one brief moment in the final battle in this book where they're actually fighting against other human beings, and Aragon's like, there's this little blurb where it's like, Aragon, it was so different fighting humans than fighting Urgals because, he looked at the faces and every now and then he was like, that could be me, but then he didn't have time to think about it, so he just kept killing people. And that's it. That's all and then there's like one little blurb
while you're literally slicing them in half.
Yeah, I know. It's like it feels so disingenuous. It feels forced. It feels pointless. It feels like a concession. Like, it feels like yet again another. Well, Aragon's the good guy, so he has to have resolved this issue. Like, he can't have a character flaw in any meaningful, lasting way that isn't just incredibly stupid and can be easily evolved out of through maturity. And not even maturity, but people saying he's getting more mature, which we'll get to that later. That happens a lot. He gets told, you're becoming wise. That was a wise thing you just said. Like, that's how Aragon's character progresses. That's not how Roran's character progresses. Roran's character, he has an unresolved conflict at the end of this book. He has unresolved personal issues and personal guilt and harm and all this stuff that is unresolved and that takes a long time to work past. Because he's a friggin' actual human being and he's not caught up.
Yeah.
And in being forced to skillfully navigate political machinations he wasn't even aware existed before, let alone knew how to navigate. Anyway,
dude, God, no, God, why? You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, why is that the main character? Why is it? And you know what's funny even when I was a kid, I liked the Roran chapters better. And that was before I could actually even, like, really read books. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I could just intrinsically tell that those chapters were better. Like, Aragon is always whiny, annoying, intellectual bullshit that's just not true. It's not even really intellectual. It was really intellectual to be interesting. Anyway, it's just...
Well, anyway. Well, I think that about does it for this chapter, everybody. Next time, it's retaliation. And we're actually going to see the shit hit the fan in Carvajal. So...
The shit hits the fan at Carvajal tomorrow.
Once again, I mean, you're just blowing these outros away, man.
Welcome to Outro Heaven. I'm your host, Big Papa.
I'm your host, Big Papa. Oh my gosh. Anyway, until then, book Blitz.